Welcome to the podcast for Boomer Women, where we are embracing the journey. I'm your host, Agnes Knowles. If you ever needed an example of embracing the journey, today's guest is it. Donna's career choice as a young woman will make you shake your head and ask a few questions. In so many ways, she's just like you and me. Yet as her life unfolded, she never seemed to shy away from the adventure choice. Now, I have notes, so I know Donna made huge changes in her life at age 57. But her heartfelt description of the soul-searching it took to create her next chapter, with its ups and downs, and yes, there were downs, is something many of you will identify with. It's so well worth the listen. And she shares so many pearls. It's not easy, but it's so rewarding. Expect it to be harder than you thought, but even more rewarding than you'd hoped. And she does share some advice for us before we close, but I'll be honest, it's not really Donna's, it's Uncle Bob's. Listen now. My View from the House by the Sea. I could write a book with that title, but the story would be like that of so many other people that it wouldn't really sell. Not so for my guest today. Teasers for her book include, okay, and Donna, I'm just going to stop right there. We tend to say Samoa, but I noticed in one of your videos you say Samoa.
Yeah, that's the proper way to say it. Yeah, most Americans don't put the accent on the right syllable.
The syllable. Okay,
Yeah,
that's good. I will try to do my best. So
yeah,
good. Teasers for Donna's book include Samoa, Hawaii, the Peace Corps. But until age 57, Donna was just like you and me. 3 boys successfully launched, a good career in real estate, and what am I going to do next? I'm so interested in her story, so we'll get right into it. But I'll hazard a guess. Her current life is a far cry from the Nebraska farm where she grew up. Donna Marie Barr, welcome to the podcast for Boomer Women, where we are embracing the journey. Some of us perhaps not to your magnitude yet, but welcome.
yeah. Aloha. So nice to see you.
You grew up on a Nebraska farm. Now, that might sound pretty idyllic to some of our listeners. Could you just start at the beginning and tell us about your life to age 57, please?
Well, as you mentioned, I did grow up in Nebraska. When I went to university for the first couple of years, I couldn't figure out what I was going to do, with what kind of major I wanted, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to have a bachelor's degree to join Peace Corps. I would have loved to do it at that time, but didn't yet have my bachelor's degree and was restless and footloose. And so I actually joined the United States Air Force in 1970, which
Ooh,
was a huge step for a young woman at that time. I look back
yeah.
on it and I'm kind of amazed by my bravery to do that. But I just needed to get away and find some adventure and figure out again at that point in my life what was next. And so yeah, in 1970, there were just a handful of women in the service anywhere, and it was also during the Viet Nam War.
Mhm.
Um, it's where I met my now ex, but then husband, and we were stationed in Fort Worth, Texas at the time, which during the Vietnam War was located next to the General Dynamics factory next to the base where they produced the F-111 fighter jet airplanes that were used in Vietnam. So my primary responsibility was to find parts for those airplanes when they needed it. And so we would find, a carburetor someplace and then make sure it got shipped over to Vietnam, or we could, actually cannibalize other aircraft if we needed to get the part that had to be shipped over there ASAP. So that was my primary job. And I had to go back and forth to the airport, the commercial airport, as well as the base airport. And so I needed a driver's license. You have to have an official government driver's license to be able to drive government vehicles. And staff sergeant in charge of the base driving school turned out to be my husband. So.
So you got your license really easily.
Yeah, yeah. So we were in Texas at that point, and of course, had never lived in Texas until the Air Force sent me there. It's a very unique place, of course, and just like every state is, but Texas, of course, has this reputation of being, it's the cowboy country and very independent, and et cetera, et cetera. When I got married, my little hometown newspaper back in Nebraska actually had the headline, "Local Girl Marries Texan," as if I had married somebody from a foreign country. But yeah, so I lived in Texas then for about 8 years, went to the University of Houston, finished my bachelor's degree, got my master's in public administration. And our oldest son was born there. And again, I guess I just must have this restless gene in me somewhere. Um, Ended up moving from Texas to Hawaii. My uncle, my favorite uncle, hopefully if we're lucky in life, we all have a favorite aunt or a favorite uncle, even if they're only, by informal adoption or whatever. And so my favorite uncle lived in Hawaii, and he said, why don't you come over here and check it out? And we did. And of course, it's not hard to fall in love with Hawaii. And so that's where I live on the Big Island now, but had a little bit of a detour along the way to get back here. But so in 1978, moved to Hawaii and lived here for several years. And then to Colorado, and then back to Hawaii, and then Peace Corps. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey.
Yeah, it's interesting just putting it all in perspective now, because I think reading about you and all that sort of stuff, I saw Samoa, I saw Hawaii, and I'm thinking, oh, this woman is embracing this time of life, but it sounds like you embraced times of life all the way along. Now, you mentioned that you would have gone into the Peace Corps earlier if you'd had your bachelor's degree. What led you to the Peace Corps?
When I was young, I think, it was just that sense of adventure and of course, wanting to make a difference, because that was the 1960s when the Peace Corps started, was very much an era of change. And, a lot of us of that era remember when John F. Kennedy formed the Peace Corps and invited young Americans to serve. And I did know some Peace Corps volunteers back then. So, I think it was kind of the seed planted in my mind, and it sounded like something that would be fun and interesting to do. Um, but then later on, besides the adventure, it was also, an opportunity to travel, on somebody else's dollar, at least to and from. They don't pay for any vacation time, but they pay for your travel to and from whatever country it would be. But by the time that I was retired, well, there's a long story in there, as to how I ended up deciding to join Peace Corps at that point in my life. But the why was probably largely the same. Again, the adventure, the opportunity to make a difference. Done a lot of volunteer work in my life, and this was a chance to do that on a large scale, and to figure out where I could go, what I could do next.
Take this question in the vein in which it's meant, but I take it then there are all sorts of age groups, because you said that Kennedy had created the Peace Corps for young Americans to go do this. I think I remember in my younger days, even though I'm Canadian, I don't know if I would have qualified, but I remember looking up the Peace Corps. Was there any issue with being an older woman, a mid-aged woman, now applying?
No, that's an interesting unknown fact about the Peace Corps. They actually have a whole program, I guess you'd call it, within Peace Corps called 50 Plus. And they've had volunteers in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s even. You can go to the Peace Corps at any age. There's no age restriction. And as a matter of fact, they value the older volunteers like me. We come in with probably a few disadvantages, like we're kind of maybe fixed in our opinions, or like to do things a certain way, or etc. But young people come in with a lot of energy, but not with a lot of life knowledge. And so I think that that's one of the real benefits of having older people in the Peace Corps is that not only do they have experience about whatever field of study that they may have worked in or intend to do in Peace Corps or whatever. But you come in with some life knowledge about being able to roll with the punches, et cetera, et cetera. So that's I think one of the big benefits that Peace Corps sees in attracting older people. Peace Corps is rebounding a little bit from COVID. They, of course, when that happened, every volunteer got sent home immediately. And so they are now back in 60 countries with, I think, about 7,000, 6 or 7,000 volunteers worldwide. I do a little bit of volunteer work for Peace Corps here in Hawaii, too. So it's fun to be able to go to the university or community college or different venues, career fairs, things like that, and talk about Peace Corps.
That's interesting how you mentioned, as older people, we may be set in our ways and things like that. I was more thinking of, gee, with my knees the way they are, would I get accepted? I can't lift as much as I could when I was 28, that sort of thing. But,
well, they do make you go through a different battery of medical tests that the younger people don't have to do, like EKG and colonoscopy and those kinds of things. But the wonderful thing about Peace Corps as well is that there's so many varieties of things for people to do. I've known Peace Corps volunteers who served in Eastern Europe in an office building in a big city. So they're really good at matching people up with a job that will fit.
Did you choose Samoa, or was that an assignment?
It was an assignment, although that's another big difference between Peace Corps today and Peace Corps even only 15 years ago, or a little bit more than that, I guess almost 20 now, when I decided, certainly. When I went into Peace Corps, you could pick a region of the world and say, my first preference is the South Pacific, which is what I chose because I love it. I also chose Eastern Europe as my second choice. But you had, about a 50-50 chance of getting your requested area of the world. Now, potential Peace Corps volunteers can go online and look and see and say, oh, there's a job for an English as a second language teacher in Nicaragua. And I speak Spanish. That would be perfect for me. And then you can apply for that specific job. That wasn't ever the case until a few years ago. So that's a big improvement in Peace Corps, I think, in many ways. I mean, in terms of the quality of the volunteer, and the fact that they're very motivated perhaps for that specific job. That said, you can also still say, send me any place and be surprised as well. So.
Wow, that sounds, perfect. Just in terms of, as you say, they would have, like if I see the job in the place, then I'm going to be enthusiastic and just full of energy to do that, as opposed to maybe finding myself in a place in the world that maybe I'm concerned about doing a job that maybe I don't feel I have all the expertise for. Now, what sort of jobs are there? Because you've talked about city life, the South Pacific. Those are pretty distant. Well, I won't say extremes, but they're quite distant from each other.
Yeah, it of course varies by need of the specific country. So in some cases, they might need somebody to come into a community and help put in a new water system. They might need, computer teachers. They might need nursing staff. They might need a consultant in the Department of Fisheries. It could be a just huge range depending on what the needs of the country are. And then they try to match volunteers up with that specific need or request. There are a few volunteers worldwide who have the same kind of job that I did, which was a little different than anything that I've mentioned so far. And that is that we were called Village Development Volunteers. My group was very small. There were only 16 of us. We were in a small country, small island in the middle of the Pacific. So after we got some basic training, learned the language, had to pass our language tests and other tests they gave us, after intensive training of 3 months in the country doing that, then each of us got sent to a different village, and we had to figure out what that village needed, what they wanted, what they could afford, what was sustainable. by spending time in the village, talking to the school, talking to the chiefs, talking to the women, talking to the various partnerships between the government that might be able to do funding, et cetera, et cetera. So that was unique because then we each did separate projects. Somebody did a water tank and somebody else did a preschool, et cetera. In my village, the primary project that we did was a marine protected area and a mangrove project. So we put in with concrete block anchors some floating buoys attached to a rope out in the middle of the bay in front of the village where they fished all of the time. And then that became a protected area that they weren't allowed to fish in, basically acting as a fish and coral nursery so that it could be thriving in there. And then hopefully, fish get big, they swim out, et cetera, et cetera. And then it was movable. And there were fines if anybody fished or went in to gather seafood in that area. And then we did, as I said, some projects with the mangroves and other related projects with that. That was my big project. We got a grant from the United Nations to do that, and with matching funds and labor from the village. And that was really rewarding. And we partnered with government agencies, et cetera. But most Peace Corps volunteers end up doing what they call a secondary project, which is something, in their own backyard, so to speak. And so I set up a small computer center in the back of the church hall. And we didn't have internet. We just had 3 donated computers. And I had never taught computer classes. I thought, oh my goodness, how am I going to do this? But it turns out if somebody's never seen a computer, that you know a lot more than they do. So taught computer classes to both kids and adults. And that was my favorite thing. Obviously, that little homework center school, computer school, touched me in ways that this big, huge project never could have or would have.
Now, your big project, can I use the word sustainability project? Is that
Yes,
sounds, yeah. How did the locals feel about people coming in, like from America or wherever, to do this? Is it something they saw as necessary that they might not have the expertise or the money to do, or did they just see the value of it when you introduced the project?
a little bit of both. They had discussed it as, when they have, it's interesting this applies to many South Pacific countries, but in Samoa specifically, they have a system where each family in a village has a chief, and then all the chiefs together make up the village council. And that's how most of the affairs in the village are decided, whether it's punishing somebody who stole something or deciding that they want to request a Peace Corps volunteer to come in and get them some money to do a project. And so it wasn't always simple. There were a lot of hurdles along the way. Some people thought, well, this is a bad idea because then we won't be able to fish as much, and we won't have food, etc. Had to convince them that it was a good idea because it was a long-term benefit to the village. And then, of course, there are other challenges along the way in terms of some people wanted to spend the money on other things, et cetera, et cetera. But for the most part, I think in my case, what you mentioned does happen sometimes in terms of challenges. But I was really lucky because I really used the 2 ministries, the 2 government ministries, the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment and the Department of Fisheries, kind of to take the lead on the project. So that, it wasn't me standing up there saying, this is what we should do, but have, the people who know the science and the climate change and wildlife to talk about that instead of just me. I was lucky to have those partnerships. I guess if I was talking to any potential Peace Corps volunteer, that's the first thing I would say is, look for local partners. Yeah.
Yeah, I find it interesting that, compared to the whole big world, the islands of Samoa, it's a little tiny piece of the world, and yet they knew about Peace Corps and they requested people to come down. So that's just shows how widespread, I guess, the Peace Corps is, that people know that they can make requests.
Yeah.
So now you learned the language too.
I did. you're required to learn the language, obviously, because you need to communicate with people. Depends upon your background and what field of study you're going to be in. If you're going to be an English as a second language teacher, that's a little bit different. But for those of us just plop down into the middle of a village, and that's what it felt like. One day after all that training with your cohorts that you've bonded with, they just put you in a pickup truck, drive you to a village, and say bye, and then you have to figure it out. Um, so yeah, learning the language was a lot of fun for me. I think I'm lucky because I love languages, and I think it's so interesting to study languages and learn languages. And maybe it comes a little easier for me, or maybe that's why I like it, because it comes easier for me. So yeah, that was a lot of fun. And then to come back to Hawaii, I had studied Hawaiian language a little bit, just conversational kinds of things because I live here. But when I came back to Hawaii, then I took some actual Hawaiian language classes too, because the languages are so similar, being both Polynesian language. In Hawaii, it's aloha. In Samoa, it's alofa. So it's an F rather than H.
My daughter spent, right after high school, she spent some time with, I think it's called Canada World Youth or something like that. And she ended up in Thailand in a village where it was really subsistence living. So the adults didn't have a lot of time to spend with her or do anything. So she ended up with a lot of the small children. And because for teaching, she would appear to be an adult to small children. And the thought of teaching an adult who made copious mistakes was hilarious to the children. She actually learned a fair bit of the language because she was with the children all day. So, and they had no qualms at all about laughing at her and then correcting her. So it was a great learning experience for her too.
Yeah, I get that totally. Because in Samoa, like many foreign countries, a lot of adults, or at least older young people, may speak English because it's lingua franca around the world. But and they of course do in Samoa as well. But the little kids usually don't speak English, and so just like you're talking about, that was one of the things that a habit that I found hard to break when I came back to America. For the longest time, whenever I spoke to children or dogs, I would speak in Samoan, because in Samoa, they are the two that don't know English, dogs and children. So just along with many of the other adjustments, and when I came back, I had to change that habit.
Well, one interesting story with my daughter was she came back and pre-college ended up working at a grocery store and was giving, this is in the days when you actually counted out change, and a Thai man went through and he was not understanding the coins he had in his hand. So she counted out what she needed in Thai, and she said he didn't look grateful or surprised. He looked more like, well, finally, someone knows how to speak the language. So she quite enjoyed that one experience in the grocery store. Ah,
That's
dear.
great. Yeah.
Now, can you share? I mean, you must have some moments, shall we say, even if they're weeks long, I don't know, but some real high points etched into your memory. Can you share a couple of those?
Absolutely. Well, just set the stage. I guess it's not surprising that an experience like that would change you. And of course it did. It changed the rest of my life, but in unexpected ways. When I went to Samoa, I thought, well, I'll have an adventure. I'll hopefully make a difference somehow, somewhere. And, I'll meet some interesting people and I'll probably, make some new friends. Um, but when you are a Peace Corps, they place you in not only your village or your school or whatever, then that village or that school is to provide the housing for you. And in my case, I ended up living with a Samoan family that I literally became part of. And I do consider them to be my second family now. And that made such a huge difference in my life. I go back and forth to Samoa now, literally, because it's only 5 hours away. And so I've been there. I would have to stop and count 6 or 7 times since I came back from Peace Corps. And so that that part of my Samoan experience really made all the difference. So going back to your question of, specific moments, I think that one of the most interesting things about Peace Corps is that you're supposed to live at the level of the people whose village or whose home that you're living in, right? And so transportation depends upon, whatever local transportation is available for everybody else. And so we were supposed to take the Samoan buses back and forth to the main town, which was about 2 hours away. And so if I had to send internet, now the Peace Corps kids are walking around with smartphones. So I say kids because most of them are younger,
It's
but
all relative. It's all relative.
it's all relative, right? So anyway, so now they have smartphones and internet most places, even in Samoa. But we had to go to town for about a 2-hour bus ride to go to the Peace Corps office to use the computer to check email. We didn't even have smartphones back then. But the bus rides were just always an adventure, I guess you would say. The Samoan buses are these little short, stubby buses, kind of look like an American school bus, with a little short nose like that. Most of them are made with a wooden frame and with this metal sheeting over it, and they're painted in all kinds of fantastic colors: blue, green, yellow, red and yellow, whatever kind of combinations, often with scenes or cartoons or other things interesting painted on the sides of them. And they gather in this big field in the main town of Apia, and then you have to go figure out your bus because there aren't any signs out there. And so the first time that I ever rode on a Samoan bus was when I was still in Peace Corps training. And we were supposed to do a practice run of taking a bus to go to another Peace Corps volunteers village and then come back so that we could prove that we actually knew how to ride the bus. So I went out and found the bus, the turquoise bus that I was supposed to take to the village, and we got about halfway there, and I'm kind of relaxing and thinking, okay, I got this, and then the bus pulls over on the side of the road. Well, Peace Corps had taken us as a group in various buses before, and so I'd seen some of the bus drivers grab a jug of water and go fill up the radiator. They have to stop every now and then and do that or whatever. So he pulled over to the side of the road and then grabbed this big jug. And I thought, okay, he's going to put water in the radiator. And then he goes out along the fence line and starts feeding a small little calf over there some milk. And so we all sat in the bus until he drained the jug of milk. And the little calf had come running up along the fence line as soon as he saw the bus. So he fed the calf, and then he got back in the bus, and we all drove away. And then I finally found my village with little incident. But then when we got to the village, of course, the bus driver stopped, got out, and had to, tell the story too about how he just found how he had to stop and feed his little calf on the way, and it was just everything unexpected all the time.
It's kind of nice, though, when you see true subsistence living. I've known other people who have, whether they've gone by choice or been seconded or something, to a country or a town where people, as I say, there's no other word for it, subsistence living. They don't have big paychecks to put in the bank and plan for the future. It's just day by day by day or season by season. And I think it really must hit home that this is what life is about in many ways.
Yeah, yeah, that for sure. And then one of the biggest takeaways for me from Peace Corps was the realization and the experience that most of the world lives a collectivistic lifestyle. America and many Western countries are on the other end of the spectrum with our individualistic lifestyle. But there are more countries in the world who live a communal and collectivistic lifestyle than the one that I've become accustomed to in America. And what that means is that there are more important things than me. My family is maybe more important than me. And so when a Samoan makes decisions, they don't think, well, what is best for me, but they think what is best for my family, what is best for my village. And conversely, a family, for good or bad, in America, we don't do this, but a family also has a lot of control over an individual too. They may say, we want you to go to this university and to get this kind of job, and that's what you do because that's what your family says you should do. If you're lucky enough to go to university, maybe you don't go to the university. Maybe you just, stay on the in the village and continue existence lifestyle as well. But your future is largely governed by your family, and the last thing you would ever want to do is to bring shame to the family because that's the most important thing. So it's a whole different perspective on life and communal living, shared living, um, is something that most Americans just don't used to.
I find as I get older, more and more of my women friends say that that's very much how we'd like to live, like whether it's a bunch of us in a housing complex or a big house or something with some gardens that take care of some of our grocery needs. We can rely on each other. There's safety in numbers. And as we get older, if there's a health issue, there's somebody right there, even if it's just to call the ambulance, like whatever. But, as we get older, we're really looking at that model. Now, has living like that in Samoa affected how you live now?
Primarily in the way I see Hawaii, because Hawaii was that kind of lifestyle, or the Hawaiians lived that kind of lifestyle until the Westerners came here, because the with the Polynesian diaspora that settled all of the South Pacific, um, there were great wayfinders, seafaring nations that went thousands of miles to settle all these islands in the South Pacific. And the Samoans migrated to the Tahitian Islands and the Marquesas. Marquesans came to Hawaii and became the first Hawaiians. So, there's a connection all the way along. And so having lived in a more authentic Polynesian lifestyle for a couple of years, and there's a difference in living it and just traveling someplace. So having lived in that lifestyle for a couple of years, I came back to Hawaii with a much better understanding of how Hawaiians' connection to the past is, not that far off, and that's the lifestyle that they lived. And even today, Hawaiians may live together in family groups, and it makes sense because that's the Polynesian way.
Hmm. Before I move on, I want to ask you a question. Do you like my earrings? Can you see them?
Oh, yes, those are lovely. Are they made from coconut?
I think so. They're Samoan. Samoan.
Yes, yes, I can see them. They're just beautiful.
And that's my second pair.
Oh yeah, so I believe if those are the same kind like I have, they're made of coconut shell.
It could well be. I was watching one of your videos on YouTube, and just the way you turned, your earrings were not really dissimilar to the ones I'm currently wearing. And I went, I've got earrings from Samoa. My former husband was with our Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and he ended up down that way. And I'm thinking it might have been American Samoa. It was so many years ago, I can't remember. But anyways, I had to wear my earrings for you today.
That's so cool. Yeah. Yeah, and American Samoa is so close. It's interesting. It's in American Samoa, there are families who are, of course, related to people in Samoa because it was one archipelago, it was one nation until the artificial line was drawn in the middle, right? And so, yeah, I was over there once for an event, and I think, trying to remember how the gentleman said it, it's like one nation, one people, two governments.
Okay, yeah, and he talked about having a fair bit of time with the locals. So I think he really appreciated that visit down there. So yeah, isn't that funny? Now, I feel like I've been leading you through sort of the business side of your life, but age 57, you made some huge changes in your life. Can you walk us through that? Like what made you sort of decide that I mean, I realize your boys were grown, they were launched. Can you explain the process of just embracing such an adventure?
Well, it partly starts back when I moved to Hawaii in 1978. It's hard to describe, but when I literally set foot on the big island of Hawaii, I felt like I was home. I just felt like this was where I was supposed to be. Well, we lived here for 5 years. We started raising our family, but the cost of living is high, wages are low, even now, but that was a long time ago, 45 years ago. So we decided to move back to, by the way, we now call it the continent. We don't call it the mainland anymore. Just a quick aside. Uh, I started to say the continent, and I thought, well, people are going to think that sounds a little bit strange, but mainland really has a sense of appropriation, from the colonial times. That was the main part of our land, the mainland, whereas if you look at it from a more oceanic point of view, it's not. It's the continent that's over there. So, so we moved back to the continent after that. And, I had some interesting jobs in Colorado and really enjoyed my life there. But for the entire time I was there, I knew I was coming back to Hawaii. It was something always in the back of my mind. Of course, I had my uncle and various cousins here at different times. And so came here to visit often. I literally think every vacation I took for 20 years, I came here to this one place on this one island. So it was something that I had always intended to do. But then I got a really good job and I was making really good money. And I finally got to the point in my life where I could come back here, but the decision to just sell my house and decide to move thousands of 2,500 miles away, actually more like 4,000 miles away from where I live. It's 2,500 miles away from the next largest landmass. So that wasn't an easy decision, and I decided to just give it a shot and come back to Hawaii because I always wanted to do it. I knew it well enough to give that a try. But once I got here, it was almost this, well, what now feeling. I came back to Hawaii. Well, now what? I'm retired. I took a job with a local art center, which I really enjoyed, but it wasn't what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And so the Peace Corps thing was just kind of like always there in the back of my mind. I thought, well, maybe now is the time to do it. And about several months of soul searching and talking with family and friends, I said, okay, this is it. This is the next step. And it has changed my life ever since I've been in the Peace Corps, the 15 to 20 years since I've been back. I've had my Samoan family over here to visit me. I've been back so many times. I now have a connection there when I go back to my Samoan village, which is called Potasi. When I go back to Potasi, they say, welcome home. So, it's wonderful. It's made this huge additional connection for me.
I think it's such a good message that, like to have a thought, an idea, something that's been sitting at the back of your brain for 30 years, and to go for it. And it sounds like you did everything right. Like you talked with people, you did probably a little bit of research, that sort of thing. But I'm going to go out on a limb here, but it sounds like there are pretty much only positives to that decision to do the adventure at that time.
Pretty much. I will say here's one little aspect that I need to mention, partly for people who might think about going to the Peace Corps, partly to just, they, wasn't all that easy sometimes. There are a couple of harrowing stories in there in my book that I wrote about it that I'll leave for later. Um, but one thing that happened was that I got incredibly homesick. I thought, here I am an adult. I would not get homesick. That's for kids going off to summer camp, or, you move from college to your first job in your first town and you're away from your friends or your family, right? But, I just was totally surprised that I got so homesick. Now, I stayed most of the course. I did go home a few months early because we had kind of wrapped things up. But truthfully, I went home mostly because I was so darn homesick. And so, that's something that I feel a little guilty about. I feel guilty. But on the other hand, I did these wonderful projects and I have these wonderful connections and I'm still part of a Samoan village. So I guess I can't complain at all in any way, shape, or form. But that just really surprised me in terms of the negative parts of it. It's You're living in a Samoan village in a house full of people, and yet you can feel incredibly alone because you don't have that person to come home to talk about your day, about, oh, this funny thing happened to me today, or somebody who understands American jokes or innuendos, or has, that shared backstory with you. And you have some Peace Corps volunteers in the country, but it's not the same.
I think that's a great forewarning, for lack of a better word. Do you think that would be any different now with our ability to connect globally? Like you could just have gotten onto your smartphone or WhatsApp and connected with your sons or friends or whomever?
That's a good point. I think that, yeah, I think that might be different now. I think it would, it would make a difference. You could at least have a video call, which would be lovely. Yeah.
And watching them eat your favorite American food.
Right. The other thing that I just mentioned was my book, and the writing of my book, the memoir that I wrote about my time in the Peace Corps, which I did several years later. I probably started in earnest dozen years, I guess, after I got back from Peace Corps in terms of the writing. Um, Also was such an interesting experience because the reflections that you have to do when you write a memoir, not only about different aspects of your life, but then about, what that experience meant to you. And I'm so glad I waited. I'm so glad I didn't do it 2 years after or something, because it would have been a different story. It's a different story having 10-year or 12-year look back, as you had a chance to evaluate exactly how much that did mean in my life, because of course, as I mentioned, I've gone back and forth, and I now literally consider them to be a family as much as my real family, so to speak. And
Now, did you keep journals when you were down there, or was your memoir written completely from memory at the time?
I did keep journals. I've been an intermittent diary and journal writer all my life. Um, but I knew that I was going to write something about it when I came back. I didn't know exactly when, how, what, but because of that, and because I do like to write, I did keep journals that trying to think how much it ended up being. I think when it finally all got typed up, it was like 500 single space pages or something like that. This mammoth journal, but that journal helped me to recreate my time for my memoir in a way that I never would have been able to without that detail. Plus, that journal became my friend. It was a place I needed to go to write my innermost thoughts, to complain, to whine, to celebrate, to remember, all of those things. I strongly encourage journaling. Can't uh, I can't imagine how it could ever be anything but a benefit to anybody who writes a journal.
Well, what I just heard there too was the fact that you didn't have that person to come home and talk about your day, but you had your journal to come back and chronicle things. And even if it just if you needed just to unload, it could have been, some fun thing or some very interesting thing, but maybe it was just like, oh man, like I'm gonna bitch and complain for a minute here.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Now, in your first message to me, you mentioned armchair travel and adventure. Now, I'm not sure if you meant armchair adventure too, but armchair anything seems like a far cry from the way you live your life. What did you mean by armchair travel?
Really, I was really thinking more about the book side of it, in terms of somebody who, was interested in learning about some other culture or adventure, or going along on my adventure. So really more of an armchair travel from the point of view of the reader.
So we're going to live our lives vicariously through yours.
A little bit here and there.
Works for me. I mean, to a point. I want to go off and have a few adventures of my own, but no, it sounds like if you were never going to be able to get to Samoa, to read your book would be a lot of insight. You get a feel for a lot of things and learn probably a few things as well. So that's
Yeah,
great.
yeah. It's always fun to learn about a different culture.
Yeah, yeah. Now, you also mentioned the inspiration to a risk and the unknown, no matter how old you are. Share your thoughts there. Convince our listeners that you gotta embrace whatever it is that's niggling at the back of your mind.
Well, that's easier said than done, of course.
Yeah.
It's easy to say, oh, take the risk, just go off and do it. Well, it took me a long time to actually take that first step to actually move back to Hawaii, which I had been thinking about doing for a long time. And it took me even more guts, I guess you would say, to make the decision to go to Peace Corp. So it's not easy, but it's so rewarding. So one of the most wonderful things that happened to me recently was that I got a message through my website from a Peace Corps volunteer who had signed up to go to Samoa. And she hadn't gone yet. She was still in Philadelphia. And she said, I found your book and I read your book and I loved it. And I'm already in love with the country and I'm so excited. So that was a wonderful connection. Not only, of course, was it really heartwarming for me, but then the next time that I went to Samoa, she was already there serving. And so I got to meet her and some of her group there, and that visit with her Samoan family. That was, a real treat. But when she first connected with me, she asked me, what kind of advice I would give her about Peace Corps or going to Samoa specifically. And I told her, expect it to be harder than you thought, but even more rewarding than you'd hope. And I guess that kind of sums it up or comes back a little bit to the, why take the risk? Because it's going to be hard, but and you may fail. You may even fail. It may not happen. I mean, people don't always succeed when they take a risk, because they don't always end up with a rewarding experience. But something will happen that will come out of it that will make you a bigger person, make you a better person, will change your life. And how you approach the success or the failure is going to make you a better person.
I think looking at your decision specifically, worst scenario is you got to Hawaii and after a year said, whoa, this is not what I remember. So you move back, whether it's Texas, Nebraska, Colorado, wherever it is that you are going to try next. Or in the case of the Peace Corps, it had a beginning and it had an end. So it's not like they were dropping you off in Samoa and saying, well, we'll see you whenever. You knew that it was going to be a 2-year contract.
Right.
And, so many things we can, even if we're just sucking it up for 2 years, we can at least, when we finish, when we get back, say, I did it. That's no longer going to be sitting at the back of my mind going, oh, maybe I should do it. Maybe I should do it. I did it. Wasn't what I was hoping, but that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, it's not only Peace Corps, of course, but there are church missions and other programs for volunteers all over the world. But it will definitely change you, and in most cases for the better. I keep thinking for the better. I guess there could be this horrible circumstance where it wasn't for the better, but just being a different person when you come through it is worth something.
Yeah. Now, on that volunteer thing, I will do a little bit of like a self-promotion here. On my website, boomwithabang.com, I've got things that people can do as paid gigs, but I've also got like philanthropy, and a lot of them are international. So if anybody wants to check that out, just scroll down the front page until you find what's there. But there's so many opportunities. As you say, it doesn't have to be Peace Corps, but it just do it now, because there's a really good chance that whether it's 57 or 70, we've got another 30, 40, maybe even 50 years going around the sun. So,
Absolutely.
it just, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I knew some Peace Corps volunteers, just to come back to my experience. I knew some Peace Corps volunteers who married, local, Samoan people. I have one friend who now lives in Samoa, married to his Samoan wife. I have another friend who lives in New Zealand, married to her Samoan husband. And like I said, I go back and forth all the time now. So the connections that you make, you never know what's going to happen. And it might not be Peace Corps. It might be, taking a water painting class because you never thought you could water paint. And then, you find out that you actually can. Or, meet your best friend sitting next to you in the class. Who knows?
Who knows? That's just, yeah, perfect. Now, I said somewhere along the way, you wrote your first book. I understand you're thinking about more books?
Yeah. Well, one of the long-term ideas that I have, I would love to write, maybe in a novel form, about my experience as a young woman in the Air Force in the 1970s. I mean, it was such a different, admittedly misogynistic era. I think that would be a good reflection. But in the meantime, I'm working on a book about, well, it's a little hard to describe, but there's a National Historic Trail here on the Big Island of Hawaii called the Alakahakai Trail. Alakahakai just means coastal trail, basically. But of course, back in the days when the Hawaiians were here, before Westerners and the Samoans and others all the way through the South Pacific, there was a huge network of trails on every island that, to and from villages, the coastal trail that goes all the way around the island, or the, central trails that cut across, etc. So there were huge networks of trails. The Alakahakai National Historic Trail has been preserved as much as possible along the whole Kona coast of the Big Island of Hawaii. And so what I've been doing is following walking portions of that trail. I would love to walk the whole 170 miles, but can't do that. At least not at this point in my life. That's something I should have done when I was younger if I was going to do it. But nonetheless, walking portions of that trail and writing about the trail, not in terms of a hiking guide, not like it's 2.3 miles, from the marker to the next one or whatever, but a book about the legends of the trail, the history of the trail, the spiritual aspects that the Hawaiians would have thought of when they were on that trail. To stop and think, when you were standing here, you might have seen 9,000 canoes on their way to the Battle of Nu'uanu over on Oahu, which was the final battle that King Kamehameha conducted to unite the islands. Or standing here looking at the island of Maui, you might have remembered the Hawaiian legend of Maui pulling the islands out of the ocean with his fish hook. And so just remember the things that happened along the trail that were important in Hawaiian history and what the Hawaiians might have experienced. And then some modern history too about World War II things that might have happened and some changes that have happened along that trail. But that's what I'm working on right now, and I'm having a lot of fun with it.
That sounds so interesting, because the trail is something tangible, and then to
Yeah.
actually go to areas that then read and imagine and things like that, and even just understand the import of the importance of, whether it's the view or the history or the myth, who knows. But yeah, that
Along that trail, there are also remnants of some of the old Hawaiian temples that were there and things like that. So it's seeped with a lot of history.
Okay, well, we're going to watch for that one, that's for sure. I've got friends who are from Hawaii, so I'll let them know that it's coming in the next year or two. What haven't I asked you that you want our audience, mid-age women, to think about or to know, understand?
I'm reminded of something that my Uncle Bob gave me a long time ago. I was talking about him earlier. It was just this little plaque, magnetic sign, whatever you want to call it, that I put on my refrigerator. It said, "We live on momentum. When you stop, you're finished." I don't know where he got that, but I think that that would be part of my advice. He probably could expound for a lot longer than that, but just keep moving. Don't don't settle. Look for the next thing around the corner. Keep your mind and your body active. Because when you stop, you finish. So just keep at it, whether it's your mind or your body or your spirit. Always be learning and listening and looking for something new. I think it
I've
makes a
heard,
difference.
I actually work with a group, I lead an exercise class for older women who are in their, a couple in their 70s, mostly 80s and into their 90s. And they not only live that, but they preach that as well of just keeping on getting up in the morning and doing the next thing. I have an expression I use that this grandma's off her rocker. So that
Yeah.
that works. Where do we find you on the World Wide Web?
My website is donnamareebarr.com. Um, but my book is on Amazon, Kindle, paperback. So all you have to do is just Google Donna Barr Samoa or Donna Barr South Pacific, Peace Corp. Any of those words will pull it up. And
And I'll
yeah,
just go through it here again. My View from the House by the Sea, A Life Transformed by Samoa and the Peace Corps. That's the name
yeah.
of your book. Yeah, just for anybody that I don't know if we actually got it out except for my opening line. So
Thank you so
you're
much.
you're on Facebook and YouTube.
I am. I have a YouTube channel that I'm having great fun with. It's not specifically about my book. It's about Peace Corps. It's about Samoa. It's about my love for Samoa. And so I've been putting up videos showing just ordinary tasks that people do in the village, like how they process the cacao, how they make coconut cream, how they live ordinary life in a Samoan village. And it's been a lot of fun.
That sounds great. Yeah, I did listen to one of your longer ones there. Am I allowed to ask? You have a guest cottage, I hear.
I do, yes. I've been with Airbnb for about 5 or 6 years now. I've had people from 15 countries stay at my little guest house. I live in the rainforest, kind of out in the middle of nowhere. So I was very reluctant, I guess you'd say, at the beginning to even consider doing vacation rentals. Of course, it's always available for family and friends, but um, when I first started, I thought, oh, it's a 2 miles unpaved road, sometimes in variable condition, out in the rainforest. Will people really want to come here? And I found out that they do want to come here, and um, it's a lot of fun. I really enjoy people coming and learning about Hawaii. I love to share that and learning about them too. I just recently had a young couple with their daughter who are taking from France, a French couple who are taking off a year and traveling around the world. Um, I've had a notable physics professor who won the Nobel Prize stay at the cottage. I've had people from Russia, Ukraine, Thailand, Tibet. It's just been really interesting.
I think I hear another book coming.
Well, I should keep more better notes than I have been.
Well, there's no time like the present. Can I ask
Right,
you a personal question before we close?
absolutely.
Orchids.
Orchids. Oh, yes. Well, I think that's one of the reasons people like coming here is because I do have a lot of flowers. I've got a permit. So you ask about orchids. I'm really lucky to live in a place like Hawaii that the orchids also love. So I'm kind of in a sweet spot where I can put the orchids in the trees and have them all over. And obviously, it's one of the nice things for my guests is that when they come, they can walk not only in the rainforest, but property that I was lucky enough to inherit from my uncle. So coming back full circle, Uncle Bob, um, he left this property to me, and I couldn't imagine living anyplace else. It's not fancy; it's just a little country house in the middle of the island, in the middle of the ocean, but it's home. I love it.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, as someone who has tried desperately to raise orchids with varying degrees of success, they're available here in Canada in every grocery store, every gardening center, everywhere. But perhaps they just need to be where they belong in Hawaii to be truly, truly gorgeous.
That's true. Yeah. Well, if we were going to talk longer, I could give you some tips about how to grow certain kinds of orchids that you probably could keep alive in Canada.
On the continent. Okay, there's another episode for us. Oh my goodness. I'll be taking notes. I won't be paying too much or talking too much. Okay, so your website link is in the show notes. All of the links, so YouTube, Facebook, your book, Amazon, are on your page at our website. Listeners, what do you think? Could you start another adventure at your age? Have you started another adventure at your age? Donna has sure proved it can be a successful endeavor. Share your thoughts with us. Leave comments where you're listening, or if you're listening at boomwithabang.com, scroll to the bottom of the page and talk to us there. Was there a question I didn't ask, Donna? Ask it in the comments and I'll get you an answer. Share this episode. We're all going this way only once. We might as well make it the best journey possible. Sharing this episode with a friend might well be the match that gets you both launched into something new and exciting. If you enjoyed this conversation, click the follow button on your favorite podcast platform and help us grow. I'm also registered at Substack. Following there is free, and you'll get notified every time an episode is released. Donna Marie Barr, thank you for being my guest today and not only sharing an amazing part of your life with us, but encouraging us to all get out of our comfort zone, maybe even take a risk. Just do it. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much.
Have a great rest of week.
Yeah, you too. Aloha.